Welcome to the Perhaps Pod. It's your host.
And your guest.
What's good?
What's happening, everybody? This is episode 4. And apparently
Yeah.
I can't say what's happening, everybody, because it sounds funny.
Why?
I don't know,
You
you're
can say
laughing.
it.
You're laughing
I
at
just
me.
think it's hilarious because I just immediately thought of someone in their car, just responded back like, "Oh, I'm just driving." Like that's what it did for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, what are we gonna talk about? I feel like we left off on something deep last time, but I don't even remember what that was.
I think we were talking about
You-
how the United States is a melting pot or a salad. I was saying it's a salad. You were saying it's more of a melting pot.
Mm, what's the difference? Really?
Well, so salads, like, the ingredients stay separate,
Mm,
but it's like part of the salad.
hmm.
Right? And then when you put spices and other stuff in a soup, they like combine and disperse evenly. And you can't like uncombine them.
Well,
Right? So in a
I
salad,
don't
you
know.
can be
That
like, I
that
don't
kind of
like
gets me
olives.
into questioning like separation in general. To be like, okay, so what is everyone else just like the same soup? Like, because at that point, like, where is the separation? And then in my mind, I thought like, okay, well, racial, but I think when you just said, well, you can't necessarily like take the things out. I'm thinking about an American identity. Like
Yeah.
I think, you look at America and you think about all the things that got put into it, like everyone who's coming from a certain some place, right? But then you think about the generations afterwards, and then you think about the relationships and the experiences that's created by that combination. So if you're just thinking about like we just coupled it together, then I can see a salad. But as it's been here for a little bit, I think it has its own it has its own thing. So I would say that that you can't necessarily take out of it. Because if you do, then it's not necessarily America, but it's just a meeting between ingredients, right?
Yeah.
That happen to be in the same room.
Yeah.
Um, I think I think there is at the very least an American expression of each of those ingredients, and that is the part that is the melting, right? There's a unique experience in that. That's not just take a little bite here, take a little bite here. But I do get with what you're saying if you're talking about the separation in terms of like equality, right? Even though that can get sticky outside of like a racial like complex,
Yeah.
with regards to again going back to homogenous situations and understanding that it's not necessarily equal, right? There's other things that you know populate that feeling of equality. But in a general sense, I get what you're saying.
Hmm.
So I guess
No,
that's my
so
take on it.
so so I was actually coming to it from just a culture perspective. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
cultures are not melting into each other. Which I mean then goes to the question, should they be doing that in the first place? Personally for
Right.
me, I think there should be some crossover just cuz like if we're all out here doing our separate things, I question the long-term viability and sustainability of that. If
Sustainability.
there is
I
not
don't. I don't
something, right?
know.
Cuz
I
then we're just people from the world living in one place. I guess that's kind of how I see it in a way. You just take everybody in the
right.
world, you put them into this thing that's called the United States, and like that's our identity. I
Mm,
just then what is holding this society together is my
so
question.
that's why I went a little bit deeper outside of like the beginning, right? Let's say that there was a happy, clean beginning. Let's just put ourselves into that fantasy real quick.
Right.
And at that point, then I get what you're saying because like everyone just kind of showed up, right? And they're and it's been hundreds of years, and not to say that that's gone, right? But I think after that initial meeting, there has been a formulation of the American expression of those ingredients. And then even further, just an American experience overall. So I don't think it's to say it's simply like everyone coming into the world into one spot, I would say is a little bit of a simplification because there is an American identity, right? There is an American culture that has different expressions. And I think that's what adds to the uniqueness of it. Now, whether or not those expressions have been playing nicely with each other is another situation, right? But even that said, I don't think the innateness of having those different expressions equates to, I guess, a lack of long-term sustainability, right? Because even going to a homogenous situation, there are different expressions, right, of a culture within a culture, right? So I think the belief that there are these lines between those quote unquote ingredients, right? That's going to end up naturally separating, right, or exploding could lead to that line of questioning. Um, but I think that's kind of a, even though quite understandable, giving history and given like going back to the formulation, it wasn't a harmonious beginning, right? Um, I just want to steer away from the danger of thinking that like, or flirting with the idea that things being separate, right,
Is bad,
is or
basically, is
is
what you're trying to
natural,
say.
right? Like, because I think you can get into a room and have a conversation, and then with that fundamental idea that, oh, because they're different, they're just never going to mix, right? And because they're never going to mix, because cultures just don't do that, right? Then having something like America, right, is going to cause a problem. Like, for one instance, I think there was like a documentary that I saw, kind of has a different take. Right? I think it was about this person who like visited China, and they were talking about the concept of racism, right? And apparently there was like a very like popular belief that racism couldn't exist in China. It can only exist in a place like America, right? Which from an American perspective is like racism isn't necessarily defined by the existence of a homogenous situation or not, right? You can still be racist because of a lack of experience, right? Because of certain assumptions about people who are different, right? So, but the core out of that experience and that line of thinking is the thought that because it's not homogenous in a specific way means that it's gonna naturally cause problems, right? Um, or problems that will never reach a good space.
Yeah.
Which, if we're at that point, then, what is equality? Right? And if we're at that point, then what is the American identity?
Yeah.
Will there ever be one? Is there even experience? Um, but yeah, and not to say that you aren't thinking that, but those are the things that my mind immediately wants to address when thinking of that type of discussion.
Yeah.
What say you?
Yeah. No, I still go back to it. If cultures are constantly clashing and there's no development, or if there's no give on either side, then to me things just go on being not resolved.
Yeah.
And I think
I
for
mean,
me,
if
for
it,
me in my mind, I'm like, okay, are we just now tolerating each other? And if we're
mm-hmm,
tolerating each other, I feel like that's a terrible way to run a society, right? Because when you tolerate someone, it's not like you agree or, even necessarily think what they're doing is okay. You're just like saying you won't do anything about it. Um, so right, it's not. I guess if we're looking at it in that case, right? When I look to the friends that I have, right? It's not like we do stuff because we're just tolerating each other out here. It's because there's actual, meaningful reciprocation of the things we like to do and the things that we enjoy and trying to figure each other out. Um, but yeah, I mean, to me, I leave it as an open ended question. I guess I don't have an answer to it.
Mm,
I
mm,
just it's a thing to ponder,
yeah.
and it's a thing I'm pondering.
Yeah. Whether America will have
Withstand the
any,
test of time.
right, whether it will have a pleasant longevity, I don't know. I just think, or at least my position is if you think that because of the existence of multiple ingredients that it won't, I think that it won't. If that belief it spreads, then we know what the answer is,
Yeah,
right? I don't necessarily agree that having those different ingredients means that it just won't in general.
yeah,
I think if we're talking about like given history, right? Given how things happen or have happened, right? Then we can get into a conversation about like making that assumption. But if it's just about the fundamental, like there's more than one ingredient in the pot, so everything is doomed. I don't know if I can get on that train.
yeah.
um,
Well, if it
but
doesn't work
yeah.
out, there's Canada. So that's where I'll be headed.
Right? Which also has different cultures.
No, yeah, I know nothing about Canada
Yeah. Yeah.
except that they're to the north. Lots of
Hmm.
snow,
To the north.
lots of syrup.
Go there.
Do they even have do they have pancakes and waffles over there?
I believe so. I believe
Because
so.
if they didn't, what would they be doing with all the syrup? I really don't know. Just
Wow.
export maybe. It's all a
Wow.
farce. They only
Wow.
produce syrup, they don't use it.
You
But
expanded my mind. I want you to know that.
there you go. So then how do we support cross-cultural communication or interaction?
Um,
Not even support, but like how do we do that?
how do we do it? Well,
In a
step
way in a
one,
way that
don't
like
make that
isn't
assumption
isn't forced
of
and
the
weird and
differences are going to prevent harmonious activity.
yeah.
Um, to actually be ready to communicate. Because I feel like, especially if you just honestly anywhere, but most popularly and easily, especially since we're here and from here, we can see that people who are not ready or did not show up to the table for a conversation won't be having a conversation that leads anywhere, or most likely won't be having a conversation leading anywhere. Which kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about needing genuine conversations.
Yeah.
Um, that is necessary for that space. If that doesn't occur, then then you might have some presentations, right? But then maybe
Little PowerPoints and
no ample uh
no discussion, no conversation.
yeah, no processing of that information um externally.
Yeah, and so like that's what I'm saying. Like I remember when I was younger, I live in an area that's pretty diverse, multicultural, multi-ethnic.
Mm-hmm.
Um yeah, we kind of just but I mean, I guess when you're young it's different too. So like there weren't really any issues that I recall. And then
Mm-hmm.
just like growing up, like once you start growing up and things start happening, I think separation into or the the predominance of your culture in your life starts to take effect.
Mm-hmm.
and then and then it's a comfortable position to you for you to remain in the same kind of group that you're with. Um,
And being the group that you're with, being like your specific culture
yeah,
that,
yeah,
okay. Hmm. I guess so. I was gonna talk about a point, right? But I feel like the point that I make can also be made the other way. So I guess I'm just gonna say it.
okay,
I grew up in a in terms of the general area, very diverse area. Very diverse area.
yeah,
We're talking about young life and schooling. I started in schools that were racially homogenous, right?
yeah,
So kind of grew up with the subtle exploration of that culture, right?
yeah.
And I had a negative experience with it, right?
Interesting.
In terms of the questions of, okay, what is this culture, right?
Yeah,
What are we? Is it aligned positively? Is it aligned negatively? Right? What are the expectations of it? Question marks, right?
yeah,
And then like doing that on top of like the struggles of just growing up, right?
yeah.
When you know, being thrown all those philosophical questions as
As
a
you're
young
growing up,
person,
there's so
right?
much going on, bro. I need to
um,
understand the philosophy of life right now. Let me
exactly.
just
Right.
interject for a second. So my upbringing was different because even in elementary, so middle school, high school was multicultural, multi-ethnic, and I remember people around, like the adults or whatever, like when they had talks about the school, or like parent teacher parent teacher
Mhm.
night or open house or whatever it is, they would say like, "Oh, it's so great! Like this school is so diverse. This is so special and whatnot." And I was like, "What do you
Mhm.
mean? Like this is
Mm,
this
yeah.
is just how stuff is, isn't it?"
Mm.
So, like I've said, it was really diverse, and it wasn't really until I got to college and that I realized like, oh wait, there's large homogenous groups and large like people stick to what. Well, I don't. It's
The big
difficult.
labels of what they are or who they are.
Yeah, but also like if you grow up in that environment, it was so foreign to me to grow up in an environment that like is homogenous for
Mm-hmm,
any particular
mm-hmm,
culture, for any particular thing. So
mm-hmm.
just going to college and seeing like, oh, like y'all have just like been together as like a group. Like there's groups to be together with.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because for me, I'm like, okay, like, it's kind of just every man for himself. Like, we're
Yeah.
all
Like,
in
what do
this
you mean?
together because of our likes and differences, and there's not really any solid, well, I guess maybe, well, it's my own experience anyway, but I felt like like things were a lot more open, and it wasn't a big deal that well, at least to us growing up, that to be in such diverse situations, it wasn't seen as like, oh, it wasn't seen as special, I
Random.
guess, or
Yeah.
unusual, is what I'm trying to say. So it was a culture shock for me to then be put in an area where
Mm, right. Yeah.
stuff was
Yeah.
all the same.
So, so I
But
I
anyway,
went
yeah,
from
sorry.
that experience, right? And unfortunately, there was a lot of like negative situations going on, right? So all those questions that I mentioned before, kids going through what they're going through, right? And self-esteem or whatever, they had negative answers to those questions, right?
Yeah,
Be it their vision of their output on life, which then seeped into their vision for like the group, right?
right.
In
Yeah,
in general, right? Or vice versa, right? Um, now being in that environment and being like, no, right? Just like not even like it's a whole discussion, right? But like just internally not necessarily having that experience, especially easily so when everything is also like school, right? And being on
yeah,
top of it, right? So
yeah,
like I didn't. I from my own ability, my options to continue, right, were very obvious from like the beginning for me, like from myself, from teachers, from everyone around, right? So it was kind of associated negatively, right? And then you got bullying on top of that because of not having that negative experience. So like
Yeah.
in that homogenous environment, there was this dealing with a limitation on what it meant to be XYZ, right, in the space.
Yeah.
So transitioning into high school, where it was definitely diverse, right? And there's one thing to be from a place that is diverse, right? And it's another to like, you know, as a kid, I feel like it's very boxed into like where you're spending most of your time. So like moving from there into a high school space where it's very diverse, I was naturally comfortable, right? Because, you know, I learned to separate that negative experience from like watching other kids grow up, right? And trying to associate certain things with like a group, right? And my positive view of myself. So I was comfortable, I think, no matter where I was, luckily, right? So then I looked at my quote unquote group in that diverse space, right? And saw more positive experiences within that diverse space.
Right.
Right. Especially since it was like a better school, right? So I think everyone coming into it kind of had that like, you know, I have a potential for life, right? And with everyone having that potential for life, it was easy to communicate, right? Easy to communicate. And then there was like less expectations, and anything dividing anyone was kind of like deemed as stupid, right? Like don't like just be great when you can be, you know? Like it was very supportive. Like all the groups were like intermingled at like all the time. So fantastic. And then going to a university where that wasn't the case, but it had the added layer of also being inside of like a city, an area, a town that was not diverse. Right. So I feel like that was an extra layer for me to experience that. Like, you know, like where I'm from, you have your quote unquote space with your people, right? Whatever that means. But you are aware that there are other people who have the same and they're right next to each other.
Yeah.
Right. So like it's also an environment where conversations, right? Whether you holistically disagree, or like agree, right? Like went to university where that was not necessarily the case, right? And then I saw other individuals have that whole like, oh, it's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
To be going to a place that doesn't completely like look like me, right, at all times. So that was interesting to watch given my situation. So I'm all for the mixing, right? To be honest, I think everyone learns about everyone, right? And then I guess with the point of this little story is that with that experience, people then feel better about themselves, right? Because I think it's easier to define yourself, and I think it's safer to define yourself like more positively, I think.
Yeah.
When you have exposure to different expressions of selves. Hopefully all that makes sense, but like diversity. I think whoever was like, oh, this is great, you know, like in your experience, I think they might be seeing that, right? That shift happen or occur. Nods.
Yeah.
Nodding is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're 24 minutes in, so
we are. But I also feel like you want to say something else.
No, not particularly.
No. Okay.
No, we're probably gonna cut out this part right here. I'm talking about the 24 minutes.
Or maybe. Or yes or no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to end. How do we want to end it? I feel like we ended that pretty like cut and dry. Like, yep.
Look, whether it's a salad or a melting pot,
it's definitely something.
It
We
doesn't mean
definitely
it's
got something
doomed.
cooking in the pot.
It doesn't mean it's
I
doomed.
guess I didn't mean to
Not
say
because
we're
it's a
doing
salad
that.
and not because it's a melting pot. I
I
think
didn't.
it depends on your mindset. Mindset is what it is.
Yeah, I guess I'm
That's my
questioning what
position.
people's mindsets are, and or if people. I guess I'm coming from a space where I'm like, oh, have people thought about this? I don't know if
I
there's
mean, we
any if
are,
there's
so I
any
think
thinking
it.
about it going on.
I think people are. But again, I'm from the space where people talk about this all the time.
Yeah,
so so I think people are, and at least on a private level, right? I think people just need the opportunities and the platforms and you know
yeah,
exposure to do so.
yeah.
I
All
mean, do
right.
you think that that's not a thing, or do you think it needs to be handled differently or
Oh,
more of
I
a
don't
thing?
know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. So
Mm.
for me, I think it'll just be interesting to see as I continue to become older what I see, because I feel yeah, we'll just have to see.
Yeah, next year or next
Yep,
episode.
next year, maybe next episode. There's a lot of
Maybe.
stuff that could happen in a week. I'll tell you that much.
There is life changing.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Exactly. All right. Well, did we want to close out on a lighter note?
On a lighter
Um.
note,
Yeah.
it's all light. Doesn't have to be. This isn't heavy.
I mean, okay. I meant a less deep. Excuse me. Less
A
deeper
less
note.
deep note.
Yeah, a little like.
What did you do on Tuesday? Like 2/22/22
Oh yeah,
on
that
a
was the whole thing.
Tuesday. What
Honestly,
what
I
did you
forgot
do?
about it.
Dang.
I saw someone's snap that was like, "Oh, 2/22/22." I was like, "Oh,
Oh.
my bad." I'm
Yeah.
waiting for 2/2/2/2.
Oh, 200.
2222.
Oh yeah.
I'll have my brain frozen and then brought back to life for that
It
day.
had me like really think about like other times when that's occurred.
Yeah.
Like we've also been at like 12, 22, 21. So that's kind of cool.
In 2020.
But yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't
Oh
know.
two,
My relationship with
two,
time,
two,
I'm just like we
two, oh.
literally measure our lives by how many times the earth has spun around the sun.
Yes, we do.
So,
Do you think that's wild? Or do you
I
think,
think it's just like it's so arbitrary. Like, what does it
Is
mean?
it?
What does it mean that I'm 5 years old? It means the earth has spun around the sun 5 times. Like that.
Yes.
What do you think of that? That means like I mean it makes you think we can measure our life based on anything.
Ooh,
Like
that's a good topic.
I can yeah, maybe for next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can literally pick anything and measure your life on it. And then you can call it a year and boom, there you go.
That just makes me think about like other things to measure your life on. Like measure it in bananas.
Yeah, or banana
Whatever that
seasons.
means. Or then like go deeper and be like, what measures your life? What are the things that you are standing on? Is it bananas?
I'm standing on the
Is it
shoulders of
America?
giants.
Is it happiness or not? Tuesday.
What is happiness? Yep,
What is happiness?
that was Tuesday.
Tuesday. Yeah.
I'm definitely like we're all just out here literally the entire day. I'm just like we're out here spinning around the sun, telling each other we're like, oh, I'm 40 years old or 50 years old. You know what? I'm just gonna start telling people like, yo, I'm like this many Earths spinning around the sun old.
Mm. If you look at other languages and how they ask you how old you are, it's kind of cool. Like, how many years do you have?
Yeah.
Maybe someone's out there like, how many revolutions?
How many sunspins are you?
Yeah, I love that. How many
About
sunspins
10
are you?
sunspins right now. You know.
How many sunspins are you?
Wow, you're so old. See, like then being old kind of doesn't make any sense.
Ooh. What is required for
Because what
old
does
to
it
make
mean to be
sense?
10 sunspins versus 80 sunspins? The
Everything
passage
that's
of time,
experienced in between 10 and 80 sunspins.
Yeah, I mean, so the passage of time, the way we age is dependent on our subjective experience of time. It's
Right?
not necessarily based on like what we use to measure that time. Although how we measure the time influences how we experience time. So that's a whole like, you know, like would
Yeah.
we feel older if we measured time in like half year intervals? So
Mm,
when you're 10, you're 20, and when you're 20, you're
mm,
40, right? Cuz then everyone would
mm-hmm.
be older.
And where we experience it matters as well. Because even if you measure time like the same, like across the world, there's still an attitude towards time that differs,
Yeah. Like
right?
ours is definitely
And
like
then,
a clock in, get this done. You're always racing against the clock.
right? Or get even like more literal and be like, like in one area, it's common for people to be like 110, right? Versus
Oh
another, it's
yeah.
like you're 70, right?
Or even
And thinking
50,
in
50 and 60.
right, thinking into the constraints of why that is, right? So there's different perspectives on time,
That's
right? And
very
what that
true.
means.
Yeah, your experience of time is based on how much time you think you will have.
Mm, mm. So what is a life that's not always thinking about the end of it?
I don't know, the universe.
Maybe.
That's probably what that is.
Or
I
or
don't
is
know
that
if
peace?
right cuz if you don't think about time, then what do you think about, right? Everyone's always like, "Oh, I got to do this, don't have enough time for that." If you take time out of the equation, like let's say, right, so let's assume time is a concept or a
Mm-hmm.
social construct.
Mm-hmm.
So the only reason we experience time is because society has now created this time that we experience, or a definition of what is occurring that we experience. So if you cut that out, I feel like you're liberated from the constraints of time in some regard because it's not really the controlling factor. The controlling factor would then be okay, like what can you physically do? Like what is your body capable of? What is your
Mm-hmm.
mind capable of?
Mm-hmm.
And where you see, I mean, you wouldn't put time constraints on like what you're trying to do or where you're trying to go. So
Mm-hmm.
then you wouldn't, I don't know, measuring things would be different. I was going to say hard, but it would just be different.
When it comes to the life stuff, is that freedom really caused by a lack of thought about time and the concept of time? Or is it your mentality towards the concept of time that matters? Because, like, let's reduce life to thinking about a project that you really want to work on, right?
Okay.
Let's just do that real quick,
Yeah.
right? Now, when getting into the example are the words of like, oh, there's not enough time or blah, 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 or instantly I think of the thoughts of like, should this be the focus on the time, like maybe there's so much time, like versus someone who's just like, this is what I'm focusing on, right? And
Yeah.
the time that comes is the time that comes, like, oh, I noticed that I spent this time for the coming up with the title of the project, right? But that's just a fact, right? It's not necessarily something that's
Yeah.
impinging your freedom of perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess it's thoughts like that that makes me think, like, is it the concept of time that needs to go away, or is it the concept of being limited and then using time as
An excuse.
right, or the thing it attaches to?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, yeah, time is important, right? If we didn't have time, it would take forever to do everything. So
Mm,
I'm glad we measure our lives by Earth spins and those by sun spins, and then the shorter time intervals by Earth spins, and then the shorter time intervals of that by arbitrary divisions of the Earth spins.
mm,
So it works.
yeah, it does.
It really does. Because if you're listening to our podcast, right, we're probably like at 35 minutes, right around.
Maybe
Yeah. How would you know if
something
we
like
didn't
that.
measure time? You'd be like, okay,
Exactly.
we're two conversations. We've had two. That's how I would measure this one.
Two
We've had two
conversations. Yeah.
conversations. you're 2 conversations in. But yeah, so
Be free
be
from
free.
time.
Listen to the Perhaps Pod whenever you
Or
feel
just be free.
Oh.
Alright.
Okay.
This is the Perhaps Pod. We'll see you next
Thank you
week.
all
It's
for
your host.
listening and your guest.
Bye.
See ya.